Okay, so today we're going to talk about firm costs. And so what do we mean about firm costs? So what we mean when we say firm costs are effectively the costs that a firm has to, effectively the firm is looking at when they are producing something. So let's take a look at kind of what a table setup looks like for that. So you first have the number of workers, the quantity of output per the number of workers, and then the total costs. So the next item after the total costs are fixed costs. And as you can see, fixed costs are constant. They do costs that are not varying with the quantity of output produced. So the fixed costs are going to be constant at an output of 0, and they're going to be constant at an output of 240. So they're going to stay the same. But what about variable costs? So variable costs are costs that vary the quantity of output produced. And so what we mean by that effectively is we're saying that variable costs are the costs for the change in output. So variable costs, it's a very easy formula. And effectively to determine the variable cost, you just take the total cost, subtract the fixed costs, and you have the variable cost. And so I've done that for these 3 different production levels. And so you can see that the variable cost is changing as the amount of output changes. So what is then the marginal cost? So the marginal cost is effectively the increase in total costs that arise from an extra unit of production. And the formula for marginal cost is the change in total cost over the change in quantity. And so effectively what we mean by that is, in this case, we're going to take the change in total cost. So in this case, moving from 150 to 100. So in that case, the change in total cost is 100. And then we're going to divide that by the change in quantity or output. So in that case, it's going to be 100 and 0. And so in that case, the change is going to be 100. So when we calculate the formula, that's going to be 1. And so if we move that down, we can see that marginal costs vary quite a bit over the different levels of quantity produced. So initially we're starting out with 1, a marginal cost of 1, so a marginal cost of $1 per unit of output. Then we move down to 180. The marginal cost decreases where it's 88 cents per unit of output. And finally, at the quantity of 240, the marginal cost is $3.83. So we have our marginal cost. Now we're going to determine the average fixed costs. So average fixed costs are effectively just fixed costs divided by the quantity of output. So for that, we can just take fixed costs and divide by the quantity of output. And so we can bring that down. And notice that fixed costs are always going to be decreasing because they're constant. So as the total output increases, the average fixed cost is going to decrease. So now for average variable cost, the average variable cost is just the variable cost divided by the quantity of output, which is in this case effectively the variable cost divided by the quantity of output. So then for this, notice as well that the average variable cost varies quite a bit over the period. Notice that it's effectively $1 initially. Then as we produce more, it drops to 94 cents. And finally, it is $1.67. So effectively what we're doing is we're taking in this case, the variable cost, so VC, and dividing it by the output or the quantity. So now for the average total cost, in this case, it's just the total costs divided by the quantity. So we're going to take the total cost and divide that by the output quantity, and we're going to pull that down. And notice once again that the average total cost is effectively the sum of fixed and variable costs. So you should be able to sum each one of these and get the average total cost. Okay, so now that we've determined that, let's kind of step and look at the worker side. So the number of workers. So we have the marginal product of labor. So the marginal product of labor is effectively the quantity or the change in quantity or change in output over the change in labor. So what we can say then is that in this case, it's going to be the change in quantity. So moving from 100, from 0 to 100. So that's 100 units of new production. And then the change in labor. So moving from 0 workers to 1 worker. So from an additional worker. And then effectively the marginal product of labor in this case is going to be 100. So the marginal product that each additional worker produces is 100 at 1. And so if we pull that down, we can see that the workers are becoming less efficient at each increasing level of production. So how about the average product of labor? So the average product of labor is just the quantity divided by the number of workers or labor. So in this case, it's going to be output or quantity divided by the number of workers. And then we can just pull that down and see that as well, that is decreasing. So hopefully this has been helpful in determining kind of the firm's costs as well as the product of labor costs.